Okay. All right.
Do you want to go ahead and get started, Poonam?
Sure. Okay. You don't want to wait and see if a couple more folks.
We can chat with folks who are on the line already.
Sounds good. Well, hi, everyone. I see a number of names listed, and the participant list keeps growing, so hopefully more folks will join us in the next couple of minutes. My name is Poonam Dreyfus-Pai. Thanks for joining us for this webinar for the inaugural Speaking Race to Power Fellowship. We're going to tell you a little bit about Coraline's vision and goals for the fellowship, and then we'll open it up for questions. But just to give you some idea about the technology we're using today, you should all be able to hear us. And there should also be a chat feature that allows you to type up your questions and comments. So I'll be tracking that as we go. But if at any point something comes up for you and you need to ask a question, we'll pause throughout to answer them.
And I know that there's still folks who are going to be joining us, so we might repeat these instructions again, but just really wanted to welcome the folks who are already on, and thank you so much for joining us. I recognize a couple of names, so particular welcome to those folks. And it looks like we already have some questions. So
we do. It says we are all on mute. Yes, I believe so, if I'm not mistaken, unless you've called in. So no one's on mute. Everyone's on mute. Okay, so the only people who are not on mute are the presenters, or myself and Sujata.
Yes, and we really do want to encourage folks to chat any questions along the way. And if people have a particularly complicated question, we're happy to unmute everybody so that people can ask questions. So yeah. So we're going to try and make this as interactive as possible. So it's a great chance for folks to get their questions answered about the fellowship.
So I see that. Oh,
yep.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I see that people are starting to put in their location. So as you enter, let us know where you're coming from or where you're currently located.
Looks like more folks are joining. This is exciting.
Yay.
Poonam, do you want to start by saying a little bit about yourself, and then
Sure.
we can.
Sure, I'm happy to. Well, my name is Poonam Dreyfus-Pai. I'm the fellowship manager at Coraline. That means that I direct and support a lot of the vision that goes into the generative fellowship program, as well as the Speaking Race to Power program. So yeah, that's what I've been doing here. I'm from Oakland. Well, I'm from New Jersey. I live in Oakland. And what else do you need to know about me? That seems sufficient.
You want to say that you're an alumni of the Generative Fellowship?
I am an alumni of the Generative Fellowship program. Thanks so much, Sujata. Yes, I was in the first cohort of the Generative Fellows program, which started in July of 2013 and ended this past March. So I'm really excited to be on this end of the fellowship development side of things. So
great. And then to the folks who have just joined, we're asking people to just type in what city and state you're from, just so that we get a sense of who's on the call. My name is Sujata Jayadathan. I'm the director of Coraline, and would also like to welcome everybody and just thank you. We're deeply appreciative of you joining us for this is our first test run both of this presentation and of the fellowship. And I'll start out, so the process that we're going to do for this presentation is we'll give you a little bit of why Coraline is doing this fellowship, what we are looking for in terms of participants, cover a little bit about what the content of the fellowship is going to be, and then really wanted more than anything to leave a lot of time for people to ask questions and get any clarification that you need for the application process. So at any point along the way, please chat your questions or any requests for clarifications. So, so I will start. Let me see, let me go to the first slide. So for most folks know who Coraline is, and if you don't, I strongly recommend that you check us out on check out our website. We have a pretty comprehensive website, but overall, Coraline really is an organization that we see ourselves in service of the movement. And when we speak of the movement, we speak broadly of the reproductive health rights and justice movement. We really see this as the broadest possible umbrella of folks who are working towards all people, men, women, children, having the kind of sexual and reproductive lives they want and deserve. And so our goal through this fellowship, both the Speaking Race to Power Fellowship, but also broadly, is to help create and support a network of innovative and courageous leaders, because as a movement, we are definitely facing some serious challenges, and we need those kinds of innovative and courageous leaders. And then beyond that, our goal is to cultivate a culture of innovation, collaboration, and an orientation to impact. And for folks who are more curious about that, I can talk more about the overall framing, but our goal for the movement in terms of our orientation to the work that we do is really about innovation, collaboration, and impact, and this network of leaders. So Coraline has been in existence now for about 2.5 years, and we've done more than 40 convenings around the country, the East Coast, the West Coast, the South and Central part of the country. There are folks who have been part of our work in Tennessee and Oklahoma and Texas. And one of the issues that has consistently come up again and again is in every convening among any grouping of leaders, repeatedly the issue of race and power has come up as a significant and important barrier to collaboration and strategizing in the movement. To the extent that we think about we need to work in collaboration, that we need each other, issues of race and power have both been a bottleneck to the work, they have been a barrier to the work, and really have been a barrier to for people to build trusting relationships. And so for us, as we started doing this long-term work of building a movement and being of service to this movement, we kept on seeing these issues come up again and again. And more than anything, what people would do in the meetings was they would call out the issue and the barrier and the problem, but they felt that there were few opportunities, and people really felt like they didn't have the skills to address them in a way that would actually lead to deeper collaboration and trust. That the times when issues of race and power were brought up, people felt unready to deal with them, or they didn't have the skill set that they needed, or that oftentimes it got brought up, or issues sort of exploded or got brought up in a way that people walked away feeling less trusting and less capable of collaboration. The orientation for Coraline in talking about race and power is that we feel that this issue of speaking race, of dealing with race, of addressing issues of race and power, is an essential competency of all leaders today. So it's not just some leaders should be able to do this work, but all leaders need to be doing this work, and that this is a competency that needs to be practiced and supported, especially as we do social change work. So as we think about the world that we're living in today, as we see these issues hit the, sort of dominate both social media and hit our television screens, like we know that issues of race and power are critical issues in today's world, and particularly in our movement, or just as much in our movement. And so we felt like that we needed to really address these issues. In terms of why Coraline being an organization who is kind of stepping up into this, within the reproductive movement, we have been an organization that has brought together leaders from all three sectors, the health rights and justice sector in the reproductive movement, and we've done it in a way where we have created intentional spaces for cross-sectors, so across health rights and justice, for people and leaders to interact across organizations, so big organizations, small organizations, East Coast and central part of the country organizations, and then also across power in terms of interaction, right? So we've had executive directors in convenings with activists and advocates and volunteers. And so we have been able to intentionally create spaces where this kind of cross-movement, cross-work can happen, and that has also then created the space for issues of race and power to emerge. Coraline is also really committed to both cultivating and scaling innovation, collaboration, and an orientation towards impact in our movement building work, so that our movement building work is innovative, is really focused on collaboration, and that with an orientation towards impact. And then finally, what we have realized as we continue to do this work is that if we really do want an effective 30-year strategy for the reproductive movement, a long-term strategy, that we need to work through these bottlenecks and barriers around race and power, because otherwise we're just going to be we're going to continue to do what we're doing, which has not been what has been the most successful. So that's where Coraline's motivation for this work comes up. So I'm going to now pass it on to Poonam. And sorry, just once again, I want to remind folks, anytime, please chat your questions, and we will answer them as we go along.
Great. So these are the requirements we have for participants who are interested in becoming Speaking Race to Power Fellows. We are looking for people who are willing to be curious and generative and generous, as well as folks who are emotionally intelligent, and that has to do with self-awareness and self-management, and willing to lean into risk and discomfort, because these conversations are likely to be hard and will require a good amount of bravery. We're also looking for people who understand and agree with the structural analysis of racism. This isn't going to be an introduction to racism fellowship. It's really going to be about understanding how structural racism impacts the work that we do and what we can do to address that in the spaces that we live and work in. And then lastly, we're looking for folks who are going to be able to develop project ideas or project problems, conversations, inquiries, activities related to breaking through these barriers to collaboration caused by issues of race and power. For some additional background, for this pilot cohort only, we're looking for people who are familiar with Coraline's vision and have participated in another of Coraline's programs. So the Generative Fellowship, the Breakthrough Conversations, the regional field events, or the 30-year strategy. And after this first cohort, we'll be opening it up to anyone who is interested in participating. So that's just for this round in particular. And in case this has come up for anyone, we mentioned on the website that people can apply in teams. Pairs or teams are not a requirement for the project. You can apply as an individual, but we are open to teams applying if that's interesting to you. If there are teams who are interested in applying, each team member must apply separately. And a little later in the webinar, we'll talk about the application requirements.
So Poonam, before you go on to the next slide, there's a question about, is it possible to receive a list of the literature that's influenced the curriculum? So we don't have a specific reading list that is required. Part of, you'll see the application, is that we ask the question of how structural racism has impacted you both personally and professionally in your work. So that's part of our assessment of like how much people understand an analysis of structural racism. And then also in the first retreat, we will develop some shared language around this. But once again, just to iterate that this is not a venue for people to learn about structural racism. We're really expecting folks to come with an understanding, a pre-existing understanding of structural racism. And Leanne, let me know if that answers your question or if you have some additional questions around that.
Okay, great. It sounds like that answers the question. So we'll move on to the next section. There we go.
There we go.
So I'm going to send that back to Sujata.
Okay. So the broad framework for how we have conceived of this fellowship is that really to be able to productively work through issues of race and power, really break through the barriers or address them in a generative way, is probably the most radical form of collaboration. And we oftentimes talk about collaboration in our movement building work, and people oftentimes also talk about radical collaboration. But what we mean by radical collaboration is really the ability to build trust and understanding and take shared action together across some deep and, in some cases, historical differences. And so the content of the fellowship is that over the course of the 2 retreats and in the in-between activities, that these are the these are some of the competencies that we're going to, some of the activities that we're going to do and some of the competencies that we're going to cover. So the first one is community building, and this one is going to be the foundational work that we'll do at the first retreat with the understanding that in order for people to really share honestly about what their struggles are, where they're embarrassed, what has worked or not worked, that people need to have a community of trust within which they do this work. That in order to risk, we have to know that there's going to be a group of people who are with us and who can hold us safely as we try out these sort of challenging things. And so we'll spend a bunch of time really building trust and building community as part of the retreat. The second piece around innovation, so many of you know about our Generative Fellowship, which is also a 6-month fellowship where we teach the practices and processes of innovation. And essentially what we're going to do is take some of the tools that we have learned around innovation and apply it to these struggles that we have had around issues of race and power. So instead of trying to address issues of race and power in the ways that we have traditionally or historically or the best way that we know how, we're going to actually try and apply innovative thinking and frameworks to this, and some part of that innovation is really a bias towards action. So if you can figure out something, try it. You actually apply it and see what you can learn, and understanding that there's going to be failure and that we're going to learn from our failures, that we're going to be more action-oriented and solution-oriented, and that we have a actual practice and a framework for doing this. And so we'll be teaching some innovation skills and applying those skills to speaking race to power. The third piece is around emotional intelligence, and we listed that as one of the requirements. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about both self-awareness and self-management. So this is not going to be, and I know, and I have had my share of the kinds of encounter groups that sometimes can happen around these issues where people are really kind of struggling with where they are at around this, and there's going to be both space for people for self-reflection, but with an expectation that there's going to be some self-management and self-awareness, but also social awareness of how we impact other people, and we'll be teaching some skill sets around that. And as part of the emotional intelligence, the 2 pieces that are very particular to how we understand this practice of addressing race and power is both resilience and complexity. So resilience in the sense of we don't just get to try something once. We have to keep on trying, iteratively trying until we actually get the breakthrough, with the understanding that it's not always the first time that we succeed, but we have to be able to bounce back and try it again and again. And this is where the community that will hold people in the fellowship will be very important. But so there's going to be a component of resilience that we teach and practice, and then also complexity. And what we mean by complexity is the ability to hold multiple perspectives at the same time and then figure out how to negotiate and navigate with that. So once again, this is another competency that we will both be emphasizing and teaching and supporting through this process. And then the last 2, so bias and stigma, so talking about the ways in which bias, and particularly unconscious and implicit bias, comes up in our work. And this is where, once again, the community of trust that we will build is going to be critical for us being able to be honest about where we struggle with these issues. And then the last piece in terms of reflection and application. And I want to really emphasize this part the most, which is this is about experiential learning, that this fellowship is about you come in with a project around issue of race and power, and that You use the fellowship to clarify what you think you want to do or what several different ways of addressing this is. You go back, you actually try it out, and then you can come back again and say, what did I learn? What didn't work? What do I need to try again? So it's you're actually addressing the issue. It's not a let me think through this problem, but you're actually going to be doing something about it and then coming back and reflecting on it. And I know we didn't say a lot about the kinds of projects or ideas that people are going to work on, and so I just want to also reiterate that there isn't a single model that we have in mind. So it could be women of color talking to other women of color about issues of race and the ways that they get in the way of collaboration and trust. It could be white women talking to women of color working with white women. It could be white women working with each other in terms of how issues of race are impacting the work. It could be, a single person in an organization says, I think my organization needs to be able to take on issues of race, and these are the things that I want to see shifting within the organization to make that happen. So both it's very concrete, so this should be something that you can actually take action on within the 6 months, and it can go in any kind of direction. And now I just want to pause again to see if there are any questions about the mouthful I just shared.
I don't see anything yet.
Okay. Let me just ask folks the question of, is it clear what we have communicated in terms of the project ideas that people are expected to apply with?
Kate is asking if we could share how we came up with the name of the fellowship.
This is probably where I have read too much philosophy. So there is the notion of speaking truth to power, and how challenging that can be and how much courage that requires, and also how much that is a process of moving forward. So in a sense, speaking race to power is also about speaking truth to power. And what feels challenging about it is that it is about confronting power, both structural and interpersonal, but it is about speaking up and speaking truth.
Okay. Sujatha, there's another question from Lillian that says, which fellowship do you recommend participating/applying for if one has never participated in anything related to Coraline?
So I think it actually very much depends on your project that you have in mind. So like Poonam said at the beginning, for this very first cohort of the Speaking Race to Power, we want people who are already familiar with Coraline. But after that, it will not only be open to anybody within the repro movement, but our hope is that we're also able to bring in folks from other social justice movements so that we really get a rich intersection and exchange of ideas and feedback, and build a broader network and support of community that integrates repro issues in a broader social justice perspective. But once again, it very much depends on your project. And I want to make the distinction that just because your project has something to do with race, it doesn't automatically mean that it fits for Speaking Race to Power. So for example, let's see, there was a project that somebody had in our generative fellowship application where her question was about how helping or working with women of color to figure out how to be bold and innovative in the kind of work that she was doing, which is working with women of color, but that in itself is not about speaking truth or speaking race to power, in the sense of it wasn't necessarily that her work with that group of women was about breaking through some barrier with that group, but it was really more just that race was an issue that they were dealing with. And so just wanting to make that distinction as people think about their projects.
So Kate and Steph have a question about examples of outputs from the generative fellowships, so things that have come from the different fellows projects. I can answer this one if you'd like, Sujata.
Sure.
Well, the idea behind the fellowship is that people are given some tools and some skills to develop their ideas, but a lot of the projects are projects that last longer than 6 months. And so a couple of things that have come from the fellowship have been ideas around convening different conferences, the development of different networks that have a home both online and in person. I think there are a couple of people who have come out with different versions of toolkits for different ideas, some around, which Kate and Steph would know, support for people who are sharing abortion stories. What else? There are sort of a number of different tacks that generative fellows have taken as far as sort of final products, but I would say that most people are still actively working on their project even after the fellowship is completed. Does that answer your question, Kate?
And then I'll just answer Lily-Ann's question around infant mortality. So I can imagine that there is a Speaking Race to Power project around infant mortality where, Lily-Ann, you have identified a person or an organization that you think is actually a barrier to addressing the issue of infant mortality more effectively, and that you think that that barrier is created somehow around issues of race and power. And so figuring out how to shift those people around issues of race and power that are a barrier to addressing infant mortality more effectively is the way that would fit in a Speaking Race to Power fellowship context. Otherwise, if it is just more innovative ways to address issues of infant mortality, then that would be a generative fellowship project. And I hope that distinction is clear. And then just Steph and Kate, I'm curious about your question about the generative fellowship outputs and how it relates to, or is there some relationship to what you were asking about the Speaking Race to Power fellowship? And it looks like there's a couple of folks typing, so. Sorry. In terms of this fellowship, it's not that there's an expected product, and there might actually be no product other than somebody had 5 conversations with their boss about how an organization needed to address issues of race within the organization. So there isn't an outcome as much as it is a process of how do we figure out again and again and again in all the multiple forms that issues of race and power show up, how do we figure out to work through them? How do we figure out to build forms of radical collaboration through the process of addressing these issues? Oftentimes what we try and do is build collaboration by ignoring or setting aside these tensions around race as opposed to working through them and building deeper and more radical collaboration. So it is much more about the process of addressing than an output. And I can't read the top part of the previous question. So Poonam?
It says, it's from Karen. It says, interested in proposing a project, not exactly movement-y, but how to work with/within institutions more or less in the social justice/human rights space, but without a race analysis. And it seems like she also said, oh, maybe you just said that was okay, did you?
Yeah, and so, I mean, and once again, I mean, for something like that, that's broad, I would recommend in your application that you be as specific as possible about whose behavior or action that you're trying to shift through this project. So, you know, if it is certain foundations or, you know, certain organizational leaders or whatever that is, like be very clear about who you would actually be attempting to address this issue with so that you get the experience of the practice and not just think about it theoretically, right? So because we can all spend a lot of time both talking to each other and figuring out like, well, this is what needs to happen as opposed to this is what needs to happen. Let me try it. Let me attempt it. And then what did I learn from that process? What worked? What didn't work? What do I need to refine? What do I need to do differently? How do I be resilient, bounce back, and try again? So, and part of this has really, this project, this fellowship has really emerged out of an understanding that oftentimes we make sort of a one-off attempt at addressing issues of race and power, and when they don't go well, we often get discouraged and say nothing can be done, as opposed to how can we be just resilient about it, expect that there's going to be rupture in relationships, that it's going to be painful, but that we can also build in processes of repair so that the process of addressing is about rupture and repair, and that's what builds the deeper collaboration. So if there are no questions, shall we keep going, Poonam?
Yep, let's do it. This is also you.
Okay. I think I've covered some of this, which is that really the fellowship offers experiential learning. So this is not abstract, this is not intellectual learning, but an actual learning. Like you've learned through the experience of doing, and it is very solution-oriented. So it's not about analyzing the problem or understanding the problem, but it's really about, okay, if this is what I think can work, let me try it out, see what I can learn, see what happens, and then what I can learn from that. And then more than anything, it's about creating a community of people who share a language and practice around addressing this so that there isn't a sense of isolation and aloneness, but that we're building a community and a network of people who are doing this together, who we can lean on and support through, we can support each other and coach each other through this process. And I think I've said this before, but it's about increasing all leaders' capacity to develop radical collaboration across difference. And in many ways, if we can do it around race and power, the rest of the stuff, I think, will be so much easier. So it is really about how do we do this work in ways that creates both new and deeper possibilities of collaboration.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to give you a couple of more sort of logistical details around what the fellowship involves. It's a 6-month program, so fellows are expected to fully participate in that, and what that involves is attendance and participation in 2 3-day retreats, one that would happen at the beginning of December, and another that would be scheduled for mid-June of 2015. In between the 2 retreats, fellows are expected to actively participate in peer coaching and networking, as well as further development of their projects, both independently and with support from their group and from Coraline staff. There would also be 2 webinars related to content covered in the fellowship that will be scheduled between those 6 months, or in those 6 months between the retreats. And then finally, as we know that the projects take more than 6 months possibly to develop and implement, we would still like fellows to complete a final activity that communicates the culmination of the 6-month fellowship. And so that can be a number of different creative activities. Like in the past, fellows have done for other fellowships, TED-style talks, blogs, things like that, but something that communicates your experience in the fellowship and what was most salient to you. Okay. And all of this is also on the website, which we'll show again at the end, but I'm just going to reiterate the application requirements. We ask everyone to create a profile in the Coraline Online Network. And then in one document, so everyone will have to find a way to compile all of these things into one document. We ask everyone to send a current resume or CV, a description of how structural racism affects your personal and professional life, and that is no more than 1 page, a story that describes a time in which you had a brave conversation about race and power, and again, that's also no more than 1 page, and then finally a proposed project idea. And the deadline to apply is 11:59 Pacific Standard Time on September 15th, which is a Monday. and that application should be sent directly to me by email. It's poonam.dreyfus-pai and we also just included the link for the Speaking Race to Power Fellowship in the chat box. Does anyone have any questions about the commitment or the application requirements? Okay, great. So now we have time for additional questions if people have them.
And I don't know if anybody would be so brave or interested to share some of the ideas that you might have as you're thinking about applying. What are your projects? We're happy to, it'd be great for both other folks to hear, and also happy to give you our thoughts on it if you have any questions related to the appropriateness of it. So, and as people are thinking about it, I just want to once again reiterate our appreciation for you both being on the webinar, and hopefully folks will decide to apply. This is actually for us and I think the field a really exciting moment. As I mentioned before, there's just been a lot. People have struggled with these issues for a long, long time in our movement, and we are really trying to figure out some really proactive way of addressing it. So this is going to be a grand experiment. People get to try stuff. Some stuff will work, some stuff might not, but we will learn a ton together, and with the hope that this then will be able to continue to roll out twice a year for the near future. So some exciting possibilities here. Any other questions or comments that people have, and also welcome any comments.
I'll also just say that if you have any questions that come up for you as you're thinking about applying over the next couple of weeks, feel free to shoot me an email if you can't think of something right this minute.
A few more minutes, and then somebody's typing.
Yes, we can. Karen is asking about the dates of the weekend commitments. The date that we have set for December is December 4th through 7th, 2014. We have not yet finalized the dates for mid-June of 2015 for the 3-day retreat that's happening then, but as soon as we have those dates, we will post them online. Does that answer your question, Karen?
Yes, and Sarah, who I know is on the call. Sarah, do you have a sense of when we would know the mid-June dates? Just in case
Hi, this
people
is
want.
Sarah. So I think we will know hopefully by the time of the first retreat in December.
Okay. Yeah, so so we'll try and nail those dates down as soon as possible, so that if that's a consideration for folks in terms of applying, we will get that information up on the website as soon as possible.
And I want to give the option if people would like to have a voice right now instead of typing in questions. We can open that up if anyone is interested in that.
All right. And thank you, Stacy, for your comments. I will speak for myself when I say I'm both excited about this project and petrified. So
I think you could speak for both of us. That seems scary for me too.
Okay. All right. So it seems like there are probably no other questions. Like Poonam said, totally feel free to contact her, or people are welcome to contact me also if you have any questions. And we hope you all apply. Oh, and there's somebody else typing something. We hope you apply, and this should be a fun experiment. So thank you all. And with that, I think Thank you, Melanie. Glad the wheels are turning. We have some absolutely great leaders in our movement, and I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting projects. So it should be a fabulous group of folks. Thank you all. And with that, shall we, oh, there's somebody else.
I'm seeing mostly thank yous.
Okay.
Thank you all for participating, and have a lovely afternoon.
Great.
Okay, I think we're going to end it right there. Great.
Okay.
Thanks all.
Bye, folks.